In this video, we're going to take a look at yet another dynamic routing protocol, and this one is from Cisco Systems. It's EIGRP, which is an acronym for the Enhanced Interior Gateway Routing Protocol. Initially a proprietary standard, but now it's been opened up for anybody who wants to use it. So a couple of things about EIGRP. Cisco created this because at the time, back in the 80s and 90s, the only other routing protocol that existed initially was RIP. And it took a long time to converge sometimes and to figure out what was reachable. If a topology changed, for example, if this network went away, it might take a while for RIP to figure that out. So EIGRP has a couple of differences. One is it keeps track of neighbors. So with RIP, when R1 was advertising, it really didn't know, like, oh, I have a great new neighbor over here at R2. It was just, pumping out the advertisements of what's reachable for anybody who's speaking RIP to go ahead and pay attention to. It didn't know literally that it's R2 and didn't verify that R2 is up and available. And that changes with EIGRP with the concept of neighbors. So when EIGRP is run, for example, between R2 and R1, they're actually going to form a neighbor adjacency, and they're going to keep track of each other. And then if, for example, one of those neighbors doesn't respond anymore, it can go ahead and make a quicker adjustment to the network to reconverge and figure out, hey, this path here going through router 1 is no longer available because that neighbor is down. So as an example of implementing EIGRP, let's once again go to our lab topology, and I'm going to leave RIP in place, and I'm going to put EIGRP on top of it. So most of the time, you don't need to have like 2 or 3 or 4 different routing protocols all for the same networks, but for the benefit of the lab, I'm still going to leave RIP in place and overlay it with EIGRP. And with EIGRP, if a router has 2 choices on how to learn a route, for example, I'm learning it through RIP or I'm learning it through EIGRP, there's a feature called administrative distance, or AD for short, and the lower the number, the more trusted it is. So if router 1 is learning a whole bunch of routes via RIP in those same exact networks, and sometimes we call a network a prefix. So if you see the word prefix in the concept of IPv4 routing, think of it like a network. So if we have prefixes or networks that are being learned by RIP, and those same exact prefixes or networks being learned by EIGRP, the router is going to use the EIGRP learned routes and place those in its routing table because EIGRP has a better AD, administrative distance, than RIP does. And again, AD is just an idea about how reliable or trustworthy a routing protocol is. So with that in mind, let's implement EIGRP. So to do that here in the lab environment, we're going to scroll down to the EIGRP section right here, and we'll just highlight that. And these are the commands on a Cisco systems router to implement EIGRP. So we're going into configuration mode. We're going into a specific router configuration for EIGRP, autonomous system number 1. We're basically saying with this statement, hey, any IPv4 interfaces, you're included as part of EIGRP. And I'm also telling it to go ahead and not do any auto summarization. Although that part right there is no longer really needed because auto summary is off by default. Anyway, that's another story for another Cisco class. So let's go ahead and let's just copy that. Right click to copy it to my buffer, and then we'll put it on all 4 routers. So I'm going to go to router 1, right click, put it there. Go to R2, right click, put it there. R3, right click, put it there. R4, right click, put it there. And you'll notice we have these neighbor adjacencies that come up. We're making these formal neighbor relationships with other EIGRP speakers, which is a fancy way of saying other routers running EIGRP. And now if we go back to R1, where previously we had a whole bunch of RIP learned routes, those are all the ones with R's here, those should all now be replaced. The RIP learned routes should be replaced with EIGRP learned routes. So here on R1, we'll do a show IP route and press enter. And the D here represents EIGRP. So if we look at the legend up here, D says EIGRP learned routes, and there are a bunch of them. So for example, the 1030 network where PC30 is, that is right here, and it's an example of an EIGRP learned route. Now the 1034 network still has an S there on the left, meaning it's still a static route, and that's because when it comes down to a dynamic routing protocol, like EIGRP or RIP, and a static route, the static route has an even lower AD than EIGRP and RIP. And for that reason, the static route is the one that's being put in the routing table. If we remove that route, for example, if we just got rid of the static route, and I'm going to do show run type include route, and that way I can copy paste. So if we said no, and we got rid of that static route, and then we do a show IP route again, what was the static route of 1034, because it's no longer available, if we do a show IP route, now the 1034 is showing up as an EIGRP learned route, and that's the D is on the far left-hand side. And at the end of the day, if every single router knows how to reach every single network, we should be able to go to a client, for example, like the Windows computer, and do a ping to 23.1.2.100, which is the server on the top right of our topology, and that network is being sent. We could also do a trace RT, which is short for trace route, In the world of Windows, do a -D for don't bother doing name resolution. Same address, 23.1.2.100, press enter, and that'll show us the path to the network. So it's going to router 1, router 2, router 3, router 4, and then up to server 1 NUG. So now that we've taken a look at 2 of the interior routing protocols, first of all RIP and now EIGRP, in the next video, I'd like to walk you through yet another one, and that's OSPF, short for Open Shortest Path First, and I'll see you there in that next video in just a moment. Hey, thanks for watching, and subscribe right here to get the latest information from CBT Nuggets. And if you're new to or considering a career in the world of IT, head on over to CBT Nuggets and sign up for a free trial.